Lately, there's been a lot of focus on broker fees and who should pay them. A group of elected officials in government are trying to absolve tenants from being mandated to pay broker fees in order to reduce the financial pressures of making too many payments up front before renting an apartment. However, could this negatively impact the small property owners who already pay some or all of these broker fees at least 30% of the time? In addition, why are the brokers quiet? Don't they care about standing up for their industry? Today, we'll hear from a panel of real estate experts who will weigh in on this issue. And among other people in our audience, if you happen to be a broker, we encourage you to stick with us until the end of the conversation, because it's more important now than ever for the government to hear your voice before it's too late. Hello, everyone. My name is Amir Shahsavari. I'm the Vice President of the Small Property Owners Association, also known as SPOA, which brings you episode 14 of SPOA Housing Policy Series. This is where we discuss property rights, housing policy, and all things real estate. I'm happy to welcome Demetrius Salpaglu, who is the CEO of Boston Pads. It's great to have you back.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Mr. Joe DeGangi is a property owner and developer who owns D2 Development LLC. Thank you for joining us, Joe.
Great to be here, Amir. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Philip Bakelchuk is a rental property owner and developer who owns Copa Real Estate Investments. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
As many of you know, we scored a number of legislative victories during the previous legislative session. I think SPO racked up 7 victories, defeating dangerous policy proposals. But the bad news is that this year, those policies are back. We're talking about policies that will limit our income, policies that will make it more difficult to screen potential tenants and to do credit checks on those potential tenants. We're talking about policy proposals that will make evictions even harder. We're also talking about potential fines, fees, and increased taxes directed at property owners and the business community. So we have to start all over again, and we have to step up our efforts. And that's why it's important to donate to SPOA. You can do so by going to spoa.com/join. That's www.spoa.com/join. We've always worked hard to testify on your behalf at government hearings. We bring you monthly newsletters. We bring you this program. We work behind the scenes with our experienced lobbying team to talk to elected officials to represent you, your property rights, and our points of view. But we can't do this without your help. So please kindly donate at spoa.com/join. Demetrius and gentlemen, it's great to have you. I want to first begin. I know Demetrius has told us this before on previous appearances, but I just wanted to find out a little bit more about each of you and how you got into real estate. Demetrius, we can start with you.
So I started in real estate in 1994 in Alston as a leasing agent, and then that developed into doing sales and understanding property management, and that was kind of the journey that became, involved in understanding where I am today in terms of becoming a developer, opening multiple offices. And it all started from really the understanding apartment leasing and how vital it is.
Right, right. How about you, Joe?
Pretty similar to Demetrius. I started in '99 at Northeastern University. I rented my first off-campus apartment, and during that tour, the rental agent, who was also a college kid, told me how much money he made in 6 months, and my mind was blown. I said, "Oh, I'm going to do this," and I got my license and worked for a local office renting apartments. And then within I think 3 years, I ended up purchasing the office that I started working at, and ran a leasing firm for, I don't know, like 6, 7 years before I got into the capital markets division selling multifamily assets. And then from there, got into the development business, and I've been doing development full time since 2012-ish, and just, started small, a single family building up to now with, doing mid cap stuff like 60 units.
Well, that's incredible. Yeah, starting small and then growing out from there. That's
Yeah, but it
great.
all
How about
started as a rental agent, so
so you began as a rental broker?
yeah, yeah.
I see. I see. What about you, Philip?
Originally, I'm an architect, who then went back and got my MBA, and you combine architecture and finance, and you get real estate development. My early career was working at Boston Financial doing low-income housing tax credit syndication, and then with SSR Realty Advisors, which was eventually became BlackRock, buying up multifamily properties up and down the East Coast. And then I joined New Boston Fund, the Rappaport family, started up a multifamily program there. Combined, it was probably like $1.2 billion of apartments, all institutional size, up and down the East Coast, many apartments in Boston. In 2008, when the financial markets melted down, and went off on my own and started buying, developing, rehab, leaning on lots of equity partners to fund big deals, all out in the suburbs. And then probably in about 2011 and 12, we decided to start doing work in the city. And our first deal we did was we tried development in the city for many years, and it was kind of an impossibility for us when we're used to doing 200 and 300 unit suburban properties. We decided that we're just going to look at buying existing buildings and renovating them. We closed in 2020, right after, in the middle of COVID, on a 22-unit property in Brighton. We have since closed on, we've sold $350 million worth of apartments during that time period. It was just good luck. We got up before interest rates went up, and have been focusing on more like 60, 75, and sub 100 unit size properties. Just closed a 76-unit property in Hanover, Mass, 60-unit property in Ashland, Mass. And one of the reasons I'm interested in this is that this 23-unit property is more work in Brighton, even though it's new, than every other property I have combined, with all of the restrictions and requirements that are imposed on landlords. And so I feel like I have a lot to say about that from the basis of comparison to working in the suburbs.
Of course, and congratulations on your career. If we go back now to the broker fee issue, there's a move out there to exempt tenants in Massachusetts from paying broker fees, and the end result would mean that the owners would have to take on those fees exclusively. And there's a common theme too with your backgrounds in general about starting out as brokers, starting with rentals, for example, before moving to sales, which is the common way that people who are new to the brokerage field begin. We've heard a lot about how this affects tenants because tenants have to put down first month rent, last month rent, maybe a security deposit, and then the broker fee, which is the equivalent of another month's rent. And yes, that can be a lot of money, but at the same time, brokers provide a valuable service, and these policies appear to be very lopsided, harming not just the owners, but the brokers. And so, Demetrius, if you could talk a little bit more about that, just given what you said about your background. I know that with Boston Pads, you have a lot of young brokers who are just beginning. How will that affect them and the overall balance of things?
Yeah, I mean, to go forward and explain I think this conundrum and this potential mess that's coming possibly to Massachusetts, we have to look back at what happened with that national lawsuit, the Sitzer-Burnett, the landmark antitrust case against NAR. And I think that created a problem where, there's this onus where there's this messaging that's out there that says, well, real estate agents charge too much, or real estate agents did something bad. And, I think that then spilled over into New York. And then in New York, you had, bills passed in New York, which essentially said that the broker, that the landlord should not pay the commission. that, I'm sorry, the landlord should pay the commission and that the tenant should not pay the commission. And then from there, it then floated over here to Boston. And so here we are, they're trying to float that legislation here. So what's kind of curious about the whole thing, when I look at it, is that there's a lot of tech companies, and one in particular, Zillow, that has said that they support this type of legislation. And for me, that's kind of interesting. And so I think, when you have like high-paid lobbyists that are running around the Capitol and trying to influence policy, what's interesting is that no local businesses, no real estate agents were approached about this. There was no economic impact study done. And so I think that it's very, very interesting that we're being driven by lobbyists here in Boston, but nobody from no politicians have reached out to anyone that I'm aware of any substance, of any stature in the real estate community to talk about the impacts of this potential broker bill. So I think that's a good place to start from there.
Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that government sort of is reactionary and not proactive. And so they look at the problem and say, what are we trying to do here? Housing costs are too high, right? And where can government assist in that with that problem? So housing costs are high. So we all agree on that. But that is a simple economics issue, right? We have high demand, low supply. And so rather than tackle it and say, what do we have to do to increase supply? Their solution is, how can we artificially bring down cost through a tax? And so the problem with that solution is that it's very short-sighted. It might sound good. It might say, hey, listen, we're fighting for the little guy. We're trying to give power back to the people. We're trying to, make more affordable housing. We're trying to, the upfront cost of leasing. Okay, well, that would certainly have that effect, but what is the long-term effect on that? Well, the long-term effect is that you are going to continue to diminish supply, and therefore prices will always be high. Right now, as a developer, it is extraordinarily difficult to get apartment buildings to pencil out. All these developments are just simple math problems, right? And what we have right now are very high costs: cost of labor, cost of material, cost of land, and then cost of capital. So in that environment, you are now adding two more pieces of two more expenses that are making these projects almost impossible to pencil out. The first one was the increase in affordability from 13% to 17%. That had a very huge impact. You saw the number of units being built last year in 2024 was an all-time low since 2017. There were about 1,700 new housing units brought forth in the city of Boston in 2024. And that's not even including, and that does include all of the expansions of the public housing projects. So market rate housing was far less than 1,700 units. So because it's expensive to build. So now what they want to do is they're proposing to add another tax, which is this broker fee. Here's how it taxes developers. If I have to, let's say I'm building a building and it's 50 units and my monthly rent roll is $200,000, okay? Now I have to add a line item in my pro forma for $200,000 year one expense. And then if I'm going to portfolio the asset as a rental, if you figure 50% turnover, on my operating expense, I have to show another $100,000 in operating expenses annually. These projects simply aren't going to pencil out. They barely pencil out now, if at all. And now you're just adding another expense in there. You're going to see supply continue to dwindle. And obviously people come here to be educated. We have a very strong economy. So you're going to see prices continue to increase because people aren't moving out of the state. So it's going to have a negative. It might sound good. Yes, we're helping offer something to the people by artificially lowering the entry fee for an apartment. But if you put it back on us, it's just less inventory being built. So prices will just keep going up.
That's also part of the ongoing problem, and it's been said over and over again. These short-term solutions that sound sweet on the surface are not reliable because nobody's really thinking about the long-term consequences, and nobody is inviting people from our industry to the table to proactively have a discussion before coming up with these ideas. It
Yeah,
almost seems
Demetrius said no one did an economic impact study. Like,
right.
Zero.
okay, well, if you had reached out to people in the community that are actually building the housing, that might be something worth noting.
No, that's true. And Phil, I want to bring you in on this. Why do you suppose? I mean, we don't have the definite answers here, but I don't know if any of you have ever thought about running for office, but if you were running for office or if you had an elected position, would it not make more sense? And we have to bring politicians on here to talk about this too. Would it not make more sense to talk to everybody, especially the people who know about housing and how to build more of it and the circumstances that are ideal for making that happen? Doesn't it make sense to talk to those people before you come up with these slogans and these ideas that just might be cheap gimmicks? I mean, what's your take on it, Phil?
So, I mean, the people that create housing are developers. Obviously, if you're going to try to solve a problem with housing, you need to bring the people that are creating the housing into the conversation. Otherwise, you're just having a conversation with yourself. The other issue with Boston is that it's a city of students. And when you have a city of students, you have a lot more turnover. You also have a lot more people living in an apartment. It is unfair to say something like the average rent is $3,200, so the average tenant pays a $3,200 commission. Well, many of those apartments have 4 people living in them, and they're only paying a quarter of that. And sometimes these apartments are unstable. You can't keep a 4-person household together. In 2021, we paid $50,000 in commission. 2021. 2022, we paid nothing. 2023, I think we paid $17,000, and last year we paid $35,000. Those are the leases that don't get absorbed at the end of the year. And you need to sweeten the deal to get people to come in and take those last few units. So saying that landlords don't pay for broker commission is patently wrong. There are many circumstances where they do. It's just the tenants are very loud, and there's more tenants than there are landlords. There are so many impediments to getting things done and getting things built. If you just take an average, I think I looked up the $3,300 average 1-bedroom rent, and you put a 6 cap rate on that month commission, that's a $56,000 reduction in the value of one apartment. Is the city prepared to write down the value of all of these apartments for tax purposes? Because these commissions now are going to be permanently part of your P&L. Or are they going to rely on those to come back in the way of rents? Because if they're saying that, no, we're not going to write it down because we think it's going to come back in the way of higher rents, well, then what they're saying is that broker commissions are just amortized over the term of the lease as higher rent. It doesn't really seem to make sense what they're trying to do. They're trying to lower the cost of housing. The cost of housing is the cost of housing. We tried 2 years to raise money for 120 units, 23 and 24, 2023 and 2024. With this interest rate environment, it was nearly impossible. Between the BERDO and insurance that's going up at double digits, utilities are going up. The third, I forgot which version of the energy code, triple glazed windows, continuous insulation. It became impossible. We just walked away from $380,000 in pre-development costs because there was just no way. And then you have the increased level of inclusionary housing on top of that and rumblings of rent control. Of course, no one's going to build new housing. I'm surprised as many got built in 24 as it did.
Right, and there's a lot to unpack there too. Moving to just one of the points you made, do any of you recall the percentage? What percent of the time property owners currently do pay the broker fee? Demetrius, is it like 30%?
Yeah, so it's very cyclical. So and to I think Phil's point, and I know Joe knows this very well. If you have a property that slides into the off cycle, good luck. And that barn door can swing tremendously from fee to no fee to half fee fast, and the price drops, and you've got all kinds of concessions. So, like market timing is important, and and the landlord has a lot of variables going on. Sometimes the tenants say they're going to renew, and you send them the lease, and they don't. They drag their feet for 3 weeks, and the landlord's busy, and next thing you know, they've got a availability in August, and the rents are starting to go down, and it piles up. So seasonality is super important, and yeah, you can see it as high as 30% in the off season for sure. And then you get kind of into your bulk wart of your most of your leases are going to fall in that September to September cycle. And I think that depending on when you get your stuff out, is when the landlord pays the fee or doesn't pay the fee, if that makes sense. So most landlords are going to do portfolio management, and whether they're ahead in what they're leasing or behind in what they're leasing is going to dictate how they put out the fee. Now, Joe's absolutely right. If we don't have any inventory to rent, of course the prices are going to go up. And so I think that, if, I mean, I haven't met anyone in the past 10 years that's a developer that has said it's easy to develop properties in the city of Boston, right? So we all know it's next to impossible to get anything done. And so of course the prices are going to remain high. So, there's misallocation of thought here. And then, and I think someone touched on it that was really interesting, was that they put these kindness words on things to promote it. Now they tried this with rent control. Amir, you remember this? They changed it from rent control to rent stabilization. So they changed
Right.
the name of unpopular things. Now, the beautiful name that they've made for this one in the House Bill number 335 is an act to promote equity among lessors. And so it's not even saying that we're going to force the landlord to pay the fee. They just come up with these flowery names. And I think that, it's a lot of virtue signaling, but it's not really solving a problem. It's abjugating a problem and coming up with a cute name and then trying to go out there publicly and pander. And I don't think that's the best way to run a city.
Well, I think it's not necessarily not only solving a problem, it's creating a problem,
Correct.
maybe inadvertently, because we have under management a couple hundred units. Okay. So it would make more sense for me then to now consider, well, do I hire someone full time at $60,000, $80,000 a year, whatever that number is, to go ahead and act as an in-house leasing agent and handle all of our portfolio, rather than pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in broker fees? Yeah, that math would make sense. Okay, so if I do that and a bunch of landlords that have the same portfolio size or greater do the same thing, what have you just done to the brokerage community? They're out of a job.
Yeah, and there's no future Joes. There's no future Phillips. There's no future Demetriuses, because you're cutting off that oxygen supply line for your next round of people that come up and intimately understand real estate. And so I think that, people that want to learn real estate are going to want to go look at other places. But there's a bigger, broader issue going on here for sure. I mean, look, there's massive consolidation going on right now in the real estate industry. I mean, Compass announced yesterday they may acquire Berkshire Hathaway. Zillow is merging with Redfin on their rental division, and Rocket Mortgage just bought, I believe, Redfin. And so I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. The real estate community, especially in residential brokerage, is hurting, and so this then bled into now. Well, and this is what I was hearing from these $20,000 Rolex wearing lobbyists that we all know, some of we know personally, that are up there. They got paid tons of money from Techopolis and other people to run to Capitol Hill, to Beacon Hill, and say, hey, why don't we, there's definitely something going on where real estate agents are being targeted, and quite unfairly, I believe. And there's a very real possibility. What Joe said is exactly what I think maybe a lot of the techopolies wanted to do. Maybe the techopolies want to be the broker, and I mean one broker, like a national giant broker, a one single party broker, a monopoly. And so maybe that's the future antitrust. But clearly, this could impact, I'd say, half of potential leasing agents in the city of Boston. And I think if there's 5,000 leasing agents, which I think Joe and I would say clearly there is in the greater Boston area, well, what happens to those people? They're not driving their cars, they're not getting oil changes, they're not getting gas, they're not spending money at the local convenience store, they're not spending the money locally. What's going to happen is that money is going to get sucked up and sent to Seattle. And so you're actually robbing the city of money. You're going to get rid of jobs, number one, and you're also going to send money to another place that could be spent locally here. So there wasn't any impact study done whatsoever on that. And to that, that kind of, bothers me that no one's reached out to anybody in the real estate community about this.
And people don't hear this enough, Demetrius. You've spoken to it very, very eloquently before. Some folks might think that brokers are not needed, that they're expendable. Why not have the tenant go straight to the owner and all that? But what should the average person watching this understand about the value that brokers provide?
Can I touch on that?
Sure.
So the majority of apartments in Boston, because it's an urban city where it's been hard to assemble large plots of land, are mom and pop, very small landlords. Do you mean, what would it be like if a tenant, first of all, they all now have to start advertising, because how's somebody going to find them? These guys aren't going to go, these mom and pops are not going to go to apartments.com and Zillow and all. They don't have time to do that. They usually have jobs and they can't do that. And then are they going to sit there and field phone calls and make appointments for tenants that don't even show up? Because many times they don't show up. And then they're going to end up in a situation where they end up paying a broker anyway, just like get somebody here, because I cannot keep missing my job to get my apartment leased up. So it shows the value of that function. If it wasn't valuable, it wouldn't exist. If we were a city that had large apartment buildings distributed throughout the whole metro area, well, the payroll is large enough to accommodate an in-house broker, but most people can't accommodate a broker. And so it's a question of landlords. As a landlord, we'd say, we'll take $1,000 security deposit. We don't need last month's rent. We've never had a tenant that we've used up nearly a month of a security deposit. If it's the moving costs, well, there's 4 components to that. We can take care of moving costs and we can take care of, security deposits. The problem is there's a lot of turnover. If I have to turn over in 2023, 100% of my market rate units turned over. Well, if I had to lease every one of those units by myself, I couldn't. I physically would have to give up all of my other job to try to find tenants for those apartments. There's not a great solution here. And I don't think this would work. I think you'd end up right where you are now, with more tenants looking for spaces. And so you end up having a bidding war that results in brokers showing people around.
Yeah, again, the problem is we have high cost of housing. That's the problem. And the only solution to that, to bring down the cost of housing, is to add more supply. Unfortunately, that is not something that happens overnight. That happens over time. And there's only so much that the city can do to get out of the way to make it easier for us. We have to deal with high cost of capital right now, and that's obviously not something the city of Boston can tackle for us. But the market will settle that out in due time. So the city just needs to make it as easy as possible for us to keep adding supply. The solutions that they've come up with are not going to achieve the goal of bringing the cost of housing down, which is the problem they're trying to solve.
Joe, what would you say to them now if they were in front of you about solutions that you think would be helpful in simple terms?
Well, again, I understand that they're politicians and they want to get elected, and so they want to tell people things that sound nice and be able to deliver that. So when the mayor upped the inclusionary housing policy from 13 to 17%, she was given plenty of advice that while that might be something to consider at some point, now is not the time to implement this policy because we were dealing with the high inflationary environment of post-COVID. And so uh, we had so much working against us as developers. We did not need this at that time. And so that should be put back down at 13%. If you want to talk about 17%, it could be a conversation for a later date when the cost of capital has come down, material, labor, when things have settled back down to pre-COVID policy, pre-COVID environment rather. Maybe there was some room in a budget for something like that, or maybe it's 15%, not 17%. But right now, it's just not possible. I read the statistics. The amount of new housing units added in 2024 was less than 50% of what it was 2 years before that, and it's at an all-time low in 7 years because you're taxing people in a very challenging environment. So that's one thing. And then the second thing would be if the 13 to 17% was a killer for getting projects off the ground, and you went ahead and did that, why are we having this conversation right now about now taxing the developers again? I mean, you know where it's going to go.
Right, right. Phil, any thoughts?
That 13 to 17, 17 is on the low side. When we are trying in Brighton to get through like the Alston Brighton Improvement District,
they want 20.
Yeah, 20 was the floor. Plus, what is it nicely called? Is putting a nice bow on it where you
the community benefits package.
Yes, exactly, extortion. So we did
that's fair.
like racks, donations to I don't remember what. I don't want to speak out of turn here, but that's just a small piece of what you have to give up to get through the constituent process to build housing. I don't know that there's a great solution. I mean, there's a reason why the big cities all over the world have housing problems, because people generally tend to make a similar salary throughout the country, but the cost of housing in an urban area could be 30 or 40% higher. And you're not going to give subsidies to students who are just here for 2 years. That's the reason they earn no income.
Well, there is affordability that happens in other cities, and it's called building a tremendous amount of inventory. And if you look at Austin, and they've done 25 and 25,000 each for the last 2 years under these conditions. They've provided so much supply that their rent went down by 22%. So let's really have an open discussion about what works better. I think that, if I could be so kind as to say, I think we do a moratorium on all affordability for 2 years, and let's see how much inventory shows up, 2 years from that date. 4 years from now, I guarantee we'd probably have a lot lower rents, and this discussion wouldn't be happening at all.
I will
Because
contribute to your campaign.
not running, never running. But my point is, why are we trying something that we know doesn't work? Like, we've tried it for a year, we've tried it for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and we're ratcheting up higher and higher, higher. It's almost like purposeful neglect, or maybe it's like malice. It's like, yeah, why don't we make it 30% next year? Okay, 30% affordable, and then you're going to have 5 units developed. I mean,
we're importing ideas that were proven to fail.
Yeah.
And we're going, well, but if we do it here, we're going to do it differently, and it's going to work here. Okay, sure, well.
I think, I speak for all developers. We all want to, build a lot, and we want to have great product out there. There's pride in building something. And there's a tremendous amount of risk to build anything, large or small. Like, you're putting up your life savings, your capital, especially if you're doing it by yourself, not borrowing money. I've worked on projects that I thought I was going to make a lot of money. And, 2.5 years later, I made next to nothing. If I added up the time that I did, it was probably lower than minimum wage to get that, that deal done. And so you're taking a tremendous amount of risk with a lot of capital. And, but no one ever sees that. They just think, oh, these are rich developers. But we're taking a lot of assumptive risk with our own capital. The government's not putting up our money to do these jobs. So I think that there needs to be an understanding that, I think the best government is the government that gets out of the way and lets the private sector handle it, because they're always late and reactionary. I mean, right now, I'm seeing a slowdown in the apartment leasing market, and I'm seeing increased inventory right now. And so, and this is like the third leasing cycle strong away from COVID. And so I think, we're starting to see, maybe it's that extra, Joe, maybe it's those high utility bills that are hitting students right now and young professionals across the board. That's almost like another rent right there. Seeing a $300 to $500, $600 increase a month showing up, that can impact our leasing community. So that's another tax. And I think it could be death from 1,000, little bites to our leasing market. So,
Demetrius, when it comes to shorter term solutions, because as the three of you indicated, it does take a long time to build. It doesn't happen overnight. I know we were promoting ADUs, accessory dwelling units, as one way to make rents more affordable without government intervention. In the shorter term, do you think that's enough? Because I think if an elected official were here, no one in particular, but one comment that may come about would be, okay, it takes a long time to build. So what do we do between now and the construction of all that new housing?
well, I think that the whole city should be rezoned and looked at, in every basement, every attic, add another floor. All building is good, whether it's affordable all the way to luxury. Just build, build, build. And, listen, the greatest, having done and rented, tens of thousands of apartments, the greatest motivator to any landlord's a vacant apartment. They will drop rents, they will pay fees. You get us plenty of supply. Landlords do not like to sit. It causes them anxiety to have a vacant apartment. So, if we just, to Joe's point at the very beginning, if we just spent 99% of our time focusing on supply and making it easier for landlords to develop, this problem would go away by itself.
And to play devil's advocate, you were mentioning a study or an example in Texas where they built more than they had to the point where rents went much lower than they expected. Is there an inherent danger in that, where rents may become too low if you overbuild? And if so, where might the limit be as far as how much you build? This is open to all of you.
Well, I would rather compete in a marketplace where other developers who are also profit-minded, that work with the same banks, that have the same cost of capital generally, than government regulation, which is indiscriminate. It's by fiat. It's populist and voter centric, and it's unpredictable. It's the unpredictability when you have to put up personal guarantees of your personal balance sheet and your home to a bank. You have time to consider the ramifications of supply and demand and what's the lowest cost of construction. But when someone comes in and applies a fixed solution that is not really fixing a problem, I don't want to do business in that kind of environment, because you can't make predictions or projections.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One thing to piggyback off of government regulation too is the city of Boston owns a lot of land, vacant land all over the city. And when they put it out to potential development, RFPs, the amount of stuff that they put in there, the hurdles that you have to jump through to have the privilege of building on this vacant land, they're deal killers from the start. They put out RFPs and say, well, it's got to have, X percent affordable, which is greater than the 20%. It could be 40% affordable. It's got to have open space, green space, parks. You've got to contribute to this. By the time you get done reading all the things they added in there, you're like, all right, well, this isn't going to get built.
By the time they start putting in Davis-Bacon wages for projects,
Yep, it's got to be union. It's like, okay, well, I guess you don't want that piece of land developed.
Yeah, the lack of transparency, I think, is the biggest problem. I mean, if you really wanted to get development going, you'd have an internet. It would be the city of Boston. It would show every single plot of land. You'd have an open bidding process, no restrictions other than straight zoning code, and you'd sell to the highest best bidder, and you could see who's bidding, just like if it was eBay or anything else. So I think government has a responsibility to be transparent. They're not doing it in this case. And the other thing that they do, Joe and Phil, is they package a bunch of small units or pieces of land together and sell it to larger developers, which I think is not the best and most fairest thing to do. I think they need to sell them one-offs, one at a time, and let a bunch of smaller, younger developers come up to be the next generation of larger developers. So, you know, that they kind of choke point it and it asphyxiate the little guy from coming up. Maybe because they're worried they're going to sell it to a small, inexperienced developer. I don't know. Maybe they're worried about public image or whatever, but they could easily raise money and they have a deficit right now. They could sell all those pieces of land right now, and I don't see why they don't.
Demetrius, when it comes to public image and when it comes to getting government out of the way, what advice might you give? What can developers do? What can owners do? What can brokers do especially if we go back to the broker fee debate?
Mhm.
What can they do to take leadership to show that government intervention isn't necessary? For example, would it be fair to encourage a system where tenants and owners could engage in flexible payment plans with the brokers and to do some form of cost sharing whereby the industry would come up with a solution and market that solution so that people wouldn't be persuaded or seduced by one of these nicely packaged, superficially packaged ideas where government puts its stamp down to play one side against the other side?
Well, that was a lot there to unpack.
Well, we'll break it down. Let's just stick
Yeah,
to the idea
yeah,
of flexible payment
yeah,
options,
sure.
encouraging cost sharing. What can brokers do to take leadership of the situation to be the ones who provide the solution rather than having government do that?
Well, I mean, the first thing is just look at a rental agent's job. They already provide to some degree affordability. They're hunting down deals. They find landlords that have been vacant for 60, 90 days and ask to get a price reduction. There's a whole lot of work that rental agents do on both sides of the equation. So saying that they just work for landlords is not true. Now, I would also argue that, landlords get a tremendous amount of help from rental agents on properly pricing their apartments in the real-time marketplace. They're much better at doing it than landlords themselves. So the amount of value that, rental agents provide is magnanimous to, the rental leasing community for landlords. That being said, let's tackle this idea of affordability, right? So most of and we did a study, we sent it out, we sent it out to over 18,000 landlords, and we got feedback. And most small landlords feel that they will be disproportionately negatively impacted by this legislation. It's overwhelming. And so let's think about this for a second. Most small landlords are going to have to try to bake in the fee, right? So they're going to raise rents to cover that fee of 8%. So how does that work for affordability? Like, did it actually accomplish anything? If the majority of those landlords just decide to raise rent to cover the fee, provided if the market can, bear those costs, did it do anything? The answer is no. It actually was counterproductive. So feel good, messaging. I think that's so 1990s. I think maybe 2000, but I think people can go and search out the truth now on podcasts and long form and hear the discussion rather than just news sound bites. And I think, the truth eventually shows up. So I think we have to have the courage to speak to our politicians and say, we got to stop these, these little sound bites and gotchas and blame other people and the boogeyman and divide and conquer. We're in this together. And I'd also say that the landlords are tremendous housing providers. Like they work, no offense to our politicians or our bureaucrats, but they work 7 days a week. I don't know many, city government officials that are going to run out and fix a toilet at 2 o'clock in the morning, a plumbing issue, an electrical issue. So we're on the clock 7 days a week. And so I think to target just the landlords and to pit landlords against tenants for votes, I think we can do better than that. And we can do better than what we have in this city. That's my thought on that.
The other point that you brought up, I think Phil, you brought it up, but you were just talking about this, Demetrius, is that let's say that cost that we had to absorb was not reflected in a rental increase, right? So we didn't just amortize it. Well, now that's a sunk cost, okay? So if that becomes a sunk cost, then let's say you have, again, the 50-unit building I used as an example with a $200,000 rent roll that you're now fronting, and you haven't increased rents. At a 6 cap, that's a $3.3 million loss in valuation of the building. So are we going to go back to the city and go, hey, you implemented this, my building is now worth less, so I want a tax abatement for $3.3 million or $40,000 a year on one building? Well, if we all started to do that, the city's tax revenue just went down. Where are they going to get that money from?
Have you ever tried to go through a tax abatement process and find how many years it takes to get no response?
Well, I just did it for my own house, and I was told I would get a response this month and last month, and I haven't got it yet. So
we filed an abatement on one property in 2021. Our property management company missed paying the tax bill late by a day. They threw out 2 years by a day of tax, of our tax appeals. And then one appeal got solved after 3 years of threatening to go to, the appellate tax board. It is a very bad use of a landlord's time to do that. But you have to, because everyone's taxes, the whole tax base has to take that into account. So you might be better off giving out vouchers.
Why not?
Yeah.
It's a bad policy all the way around. I mean, this is an international city. We have people coming from we all know as landlords, we have so many tenants that are not from Massachusetts. They're spending money here, and if they are paying the broker's commission, and many of them are, it's being spent locally here. So what's the problem with that? I just don't, on its face, I don't see a problem. If you have international people coming and spending money here, doesn't that make our city wealthier? Now, what's the option? The techopolies suck all the money and send it to Seattle or to Virginia? How is that going to benefit us other than their lobbyists? They're going to have beautiful suits, gorgeous suits. That's amazing. They have some of the nicest suits I've ever seen, running around and with their beautiful watches. But, those guys, they can speak so articulately, and they magically explain how good this is going to be, paid by, giant mega techopoly corporations. But at the end of the day, I think it's all a ruse. And Boston loses. Boston loses jobs. Boston loses your next line of developers. I mean, how you want money spent in the city of Boston. You want money. That's how you build a city, not say, let's just ship it up to a techopoly. Here, what do you think is going to happen when you get rid of half of the real estate agents? Who's going to win? It's going to be the advertisers on the techopolies. The internet's going to win. And that's going to be click, 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 because I think for some reason, there's a belief that technology can replace real estate agents, maybe by these tech companies, maybe by their lobbyists explaining it to politicians. But real estate agents are not replaceable. Some of them are for sure, but most of them aren't, and they provide an incredibly valuable service because real estate is very, very unique. It's not, a lot of these techopolies are treating it like it's the travel industry or something like that. We can just click, 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 and you're going to fly to Bermuda, but that's not how real estate works.
I also worry that if the tenants don't pay commissions, there's very little incentive to moving every year or 2 years. And as it is, if we're paying a lot of commissions now because we may end up on the wrong side of the leasing season on a proportion of units, you may add 50% of units to the market every year if it's a frictionless event to pick up and move, because these students have nothing. I mean, they can fit stuff in 2 car rides. So I think it's going to make the situation even worse.
So, Joe, there has been talk about enforcing a 90-day notice where you have to give tenants 90 days worth of notice to see whether they want to renew or not. What are your feelings about that proposal?
Well, let's just specify it's capping it at 90 days. So I cannot request, 6 months in advance. I need to know if you're moving out, right? So it's laughable in that we just throughout this podcast discussed the implementation of what would happen if the onus to pay the broker fees put on the landlord. And one of those potential impacts is that it could really decimate the brokerage community to the point where you now have significant less amount of people acting as rental agents. Okay, so if that's the climate that we're in, now you're going to, on top of that, put on this restriction that I have to give 90 days max notice to my tenants. So now there's less rental agents. I have to step in as the landlord to do the leasing, and you're giving me 90 days to rent my entire portfolio out. I mean, these are like unintended consequences that no one is thinking about. I get it that you're trying to advocate on behalf of the tenant. Let's bring down costs. Let's make this more fair. But it's not like that these are punitive measures put in place, to take advantage of the tenant. They're not. This is just the market doing what the market does. We need time in order to get through the amount of inventory that we've got to get through. And that right now, that is with brokers. So if you take brokers out of the picture and then shorten that time, I don't understand how you think that that's going to work.
Well, they have to help all of us, not just the tenants. They have to help make it easier for us to do what we have to do as business owners, which then helps the tenants. I'm sorry, Demetrius, go ahead.
No, I mean, Joe's right. I mean, you're literally trying to make them like real estate agents into like seasonal migrant workers for 3 months. And there's just look, real estate agents already work mega hours to begin with. They work Saturdays, they work Sundays. I don't know if our elected officials do, and a lot of bureaucrats. I'm going to guess they don't. And maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe I'll get criticized about it. But let me tell you, Saturdays and Sundays are a foregone conclusion for real estate agents. And now you want to take a leasing cycle and turn it into 3 months. And they're going to have to work 120 hours a week. They won't sleep. I mean, this is not healthy. And then think about it. Most of the colleges, right? We got 200,000 college kids back there. Most of them leave by May. So what would you want them to do? Fly to Japan and then fly back? I mean, is that smart? Fly across the world? This is an international city. They don't have any apartments to rent. They can't rent till after June, after you give 90 days notice. Does this even make sense? It makes no sense. So again, there's no thinking done, or there's bad thinking done, or malicious thinking done. It's one of those three, or all of those three, done by the politicians. Maybe a lobbyist coerced them into that idea, or told them it was a good idea. I don't know, but like the bottom line is, none of us are ever getting called by politicians or bureaucrats to ask us, how would this impact the city of Boston? I mean, that would literally bring Boston to its knees. It would literally bring Boston to its knees. And not one person thought about that.
And so, given everything that's been said, I think what we can take away from this is that it's more important than ever for everybody in the real estate industry to step up and to advocate for themselves, whether you happen to be an owner, a developer, or a real estate broker. I know that many of you will say that you're too busy at work, to the point where you don't have enough time to contact your elected officials and to stick up for yourselves. But that's not an excuse. It's really not an excuse, because if you adopt that attitude, you will be out of business. And if you think you can find safe pastures in a different state, who knows what'll happen? What if things get tough in those other places? Are you going to run away? Are you going to keep running away from one state to another state? Eventually, we have to draw a line, and we have to stand up for ourselves. That's why joining SPOA and donating to SPOA is important. You can do this by going to spoa.com/join, www.spoa.com/join. Please sign up to become a member. Please sign up to receive our emails. Please donate to us because now we need your donations more than ever. And if you have any questions, you can contact us at askspoa@gmail.com. Only you can stand up for you. We're happy to introduce you to elected officials. We're happy to stand up in the battle with you, but we can't do it for you. And as an organization, we can't get anywhere without your active involvement, without your financial support, and without your participation. So please join us today. I can't overstate how important this is. Your industry, your future, our tenants, everything is on the line. So please join us now.